THE% 20 PORTLAND% 20 TIMBERS% 20 RETURNED% 20 HOME% 20 WITH% 28% 20 DOMINANT% 2030% 20 VICTORY% 20 OVER% 20 ORLANDO% 20 CITY% 20 SE% 20 SUNDAY% 20 NIGHT% 20 AT% 20 PROVIDENCE% 20 PART.% 20 HERE% 20 ARE% 20 THREE% 20 KEY% 20 STATMAN% 20 takeaways% 20 FROM% 20 Porval.% 2020 SCORING% 20 FOR% 20 A% 20 NINTH% 20 CONSECUTIVE% 20 match% 20 MIDFIELDER% C2% A0 DIEGO% 20 Virginia LERI% C2% A0 USED% 20 A% 20 B RACE% 20 TO% 20 PROPEL% 20 HIM% 20 TO% 2020% 20 GOALS% 20 OM% 20 THE% 20 season.% 20 THE% 2020% 20 grams OALS% 20 IS% 20 THE% 20 MOST% 20 BY% 20 ANY% 20 MLS% 20 MIDFIDLDE R% 20 EVER% 20 IM% 20 A% 20 SINGLE% 20 SEASON% 20 AND% 20 ALSO% 20 SETS% 20 THE% 20 CLUB% 20 RECORD% 20 FOR% 20 GOALS% 20 IN% 20 A% 20 season.% 206 FORWARD% C2% A0 DARREM% 20 MATTOCKS C2% A0 BECAME% 20 THE% 20 FIRST% 20 TIMBERS% 20 PLAYER% 20 TO% 20 EVER% 20 HAVE% 20 SIX% 20 OR% 20 MORE% 20 SHOTS% 20 OM% 20 GOAL% 20 IN% 20 A% 20 SINGLE% 20 MLS% 20 match.% 20 Maddox% 20 WHO% 20 SCORED% 20 IM% 20 THE% 20 FIRST% 20 half% 20 IS% 20 THE% 20 FIRD% 20 MLS% 20 PLAYER% 20 TO% 20 HAVE% C2% A0 SIX% 20 SHOTS% 20 ON% 20 GOAL% 20 IM% 20 A% 20 MATCH% 20 THIS% 20 season% 20 join ing% 20 DAVID% 20 VILLA% 20 AND% 20 SE BASTIA and % 20 Gvinco.% C2% A0% 2098% AFTER% 20 MISSING% 20 ONLY% 20 ONE% 20 OF% 20 HIS% 2056% 20 PASSES% 20 ON% 20 THE% 20 night% 20 MIDFIDLDE R% 20 DAR LINGTON% 20 NAGBE% 20 BECAME% 20 THE% 20 ONLY% 20 midfield DER% 20 IN% 20 MLS% 20 WITH% 20 TWO% C2% A0 GAMES% 20 OF% C2% A098%. 20 percent 20 passing percent 20 in percent 28 percent 20 match percent 20 this percent 20 cason percent 20 min. Percent 2020 percent 20 passes.